Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Starseed Immersion podcast. Today, I have Jules Arnes, and she is the founder of Becoming BioQuantum and the creator of the DMT method, which is a pioneering system of DNA activation and frequency healing. With over 35 years in the field of conscious evolution, Jules bridges science and spirituality to unlock the DNA's innate intelligence and guide others into higher states of embodiment, awareness, and quantum creation. Thank you so much for being here, Jules. It's so nice to have you on my show again.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, first and foremost, we were sharing something exciting that has been unfolding in your world lately, and I would love to hear a little bit of your backstory of what led up to today's topic, which is activating cellular um, ascension.
Hey, yeah, so, my whole life I've always known that I was, I don't want to say different. I just never felt connected to the human experience. And I never really understood why. All the way back to when I was 5 years old, I've been working with what I called them the blue men because they were blue. And makes sense, right? And I used to laugh that it's not human, it's blue men. So that was kind of how they got their name. And way back when I was 5, they gave me three symbols that were a technology. And basically, what the technology would do would take an observed state and bring it into neutrality and then put it into a higher frequency or source frequency. And it taught how that's working on a cellular level so that cells are no longer observing a programmed body, reality, and mind, but it's actually identifying in the frequency of source. So it takes the cell and turns it inside out and brings I guess you could say, the identity of the cell into the technology of the DNA. And a lot of us hear that our DNA has 12 or more strands, and that's absolutely true. It does actually have more strands. Once we activate all 12, we go into another series of DNA that's actually stored in the mitochondria. And that DNA is actually spherical, which makes sense if we're going to be moving into a spherical state of existence. So they've been with me my whole life. And along the way, just like so many of us, we're always led to one breadcrumb after the other. And I'll kind of stop and just make sure you don't have any questions or reflection on that. And then we can continue if you want to.
Absolutely do. So for those of us who aren't aware that we have 12 DNA strands, what is the intelligence behind that? So many of us know we have the two DNA strand, right? And so what in the world is 12 DNA strands?
Yes, and I think this is the most fun but we actually do you can actually go and see that we actually do have 12. The reason that we're focused on the two is because that's what can be studied. That's what we study in school. That's what the doctors are basing everything on when you go to the doctor. And that's what we call the two-strand biology. It's the biology that we can touch and we can feel and that we can look at under a microscope. But now, as we're moving into quantum biology, we also recognize that there are 10 other strands of DNA, but the microscope that we are able to see, it's not really seeing that they're doing anything, but we do know that they have proteins and that they do have a purpose. Well, what we're starting to find out, and I think one day science will catch up with it, is that these are the multidimensional aspects of the body because our body is a quantum field, and quantum biology has already proven that we are an energetic field, that we're not actually dense. And we're having that experience because that's where our consciousness is being held. And so we're creating this reality that our body is just physical, but we know I mean, even those of us that are tapping into our intuitive powers recognize that our consciousness is able to hold higher and higher frequencies and experience higher fields. So we have these experiences of leaving our body, but we're really not leaving our body. We're experiencing our body at a higher frequency. And so my work is to activate these other 12 strands of DNA so that we can ascend our consciousness through the body, so that we're not using consciousness to try to ascend the body or using consciousness to even try to ascend, that the technology for that ascension is actually stored in our DNA. And that's another thing that science has proven, that the frequency of source is transcribed in our DNA. So the map of ascension is in the cells. And that's why I say activate cell ascension, is that we can start to turn on this technology, and then these frequencies are released, and those frequencies start to inform our consciousness, and we start to shift to the other side where we're no longer observing programmed reality, but we are experiencing what we are meant to be. And all along, we're actually moving our consciousness through the ascension of the body. That was a mouthful.
It was, but like what I understood was that our frequency, like the density in our cells, like if we can raise the frequency in our cells, we already go through the ascension process. Like we don't have to do all of these complicated steps as long as we know how to raise the frequency within our body. And this is almost something that I'm coming to understand as well, is like even though I was doing consciousness work, I still had to bring it into the body or else it wouldn't integrate. So could you share a little bit about like the process of that, how it all ties together, maybe physically, emotionally, and the alchemical process that happens?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think another way that we can look at it is we've been taught to have consciousness kind of inform what it is that we want. So an example of that is like, oh, I'm going to manifest this. And then we kind of just leave the body behind, and then we're looking in our reality for the answers, right? And so when we start to activate the 12 strand DNA system, we can still ask questions. Because you can see it like a technology. I kind of laugh. It's like, oh, it's like the chat GPT. So we just go in and ask it a question. And then if we are like really, really quiet inside, right? So the question is, all it's doing is it's prompting the frequency for the answer. And so the answer is released, and the 12 strands will start to turn on and release the frequency of the answer. And this is how in the beginning, we can learn to work with the technology, because at the beginning, we have to learn how to use it. And then once we know how to use it, it actually begins to use us, because we trust it enough to let it actually take over consciousness. Because the consciousness is a tool, and it's not an identity. So oftentimes we'll use consciousness, and then whatever it is that it's attuned to or that it's aware of, it's observing, we identify in. But the opposite is actually supposed to be true, is that instead of asking the question and then identifying with whatever the frequency is with our consciousness, well, there's going to be programming in that, right? Because our consciousness is only can hold whatever frequency it's at, but the frequency that's releasing is at a much higher frequency. So what I've been taught is that we actually move from observing the answer to attuning our consciousness to it. So we're matching the frequency of the answer. And a lot of times that will take time to move our consciousness into a frequency to where it actually understands what the answer is. And that's what we call the attuning process. And then that's when it hits it, we have like the boom, the download, and consciousness actually moved into the technology itself. So what that starts to look like is we're starting to participate in the ascension of the body every time that we choose to not identify as the body, but we're attuning to the frequency of where the body is leading us. And by doing that, the body starts to hold a higher frequency. We start to experience higher states of consciousness. We start to experience instant healing. We start to experience that flow state, creativity, all the amazing downloads of like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought of that. But it's all, you start to interact with the technology of the DNA.
Could you give us a like a personal or a specific example of the difference between tuning into something that's outside of us versus tuning into the frequency of our body and then manifesting or allowing, I would say like allowing us to be guided to match that frequency versus trying to manifest something externally?
Yeah, I actually have. So this is an example of the difference of what it feels like. But before we do that, I think it's really important to, when we're tuning into something outside of ourselves, a lot of times, like I'm trying to think, give me an example of what you mean by that so that I can answer it very clearly.
So I guess from a personal perspective, I would say like when someone says, "Oh, like I want to manifest, for example, like more clients in my business," or "I want to know what's the next thing that I'm supposed to be launching," right? And perhaps you're sitting and you're just like trying to think of how to do this and trying to manifest a specific number. Would you
Hmm.
say that's the wrong way to go about it? And instead, there's a different process to go about it.
Okay, perfect. I thought that's the way you were saying it, but I wanted to clarify. So I have the perfect exercise to show you the difference. So let's just do it. So let's everybody shut your eyes. And so we're going to make it really simple, but you can take your example if you want to. So when we're going into this place where we're asking to manifest something and then we're trying to figure it out, that's what I call the third level of consciousness and down. So imagine what a sunflower would look like. So just take your imagination and picture a sunflower. And as you're picturing the sunflower, notice what your body feels like. Notice what it feels like even to hold the picture like in your mind, like what your mind feels like. Okay, and then you go ahead and open your eyes. So that's what it is to pull information from imagination, or what I call programming. And now I'm going to show you what it is to ask for the same experience, but have an attuning process to where the information comes from the DNA. So now you can shut your eyes and we're going to ask, what is a sunflower? And we're going to ask that that source frequency from the DNA release. And you could even say, show me a sunflower. So now you're moving your consciousness into a space of allowing, and you can feel that your body will start to open up. It feels more expansive. And all you're doing is you're allowing, you're waiting. You're waiting for the frequency to hit your consciousness. And with this one, it's a little bit easier because there's no interference of what that would be like. So it may be that you still see the sunflower. It may be that your body becomes the sunflower. It may be just a feeling that you have. But notice the most important part is to recognize what it feels like consciously to receive by allowing versus trying. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So that's the difference. And so many of us kind of stay in that other space of trying to find the answer and shifting to the other side and allowing it to come through. It is very, because you're focused inward, right? You're inward and you're attuning your consciousness. It's like a different feeling. I don't know how to explain it. I think that's why you have to almost do it.
It's interesting because like when I shifted the question to like um sh I guess like show me the sunflower, right? Or asking consciousness to show me the sunflower. It started with the seed and then it grew into a sunflower. And I think when I asked more personal question, like I would say like, okay, what is uh what is a client? Or what, I guess from the personal example I was trying, what is a client? Or what is a program, right? And I wasn't able to get any information from that. So do you have any insight as to why that is?
Yeah, so the bigger the question and the further the frequency is from your like outside of your programming, the longer the attuning process will be. So with a sunflower, your consciousness can have that experience because it knows that experience. But when you're asking a question of something that your consciousness doesn't already know, right? So you shifted from what is a sunflower from imagination to what is a sunflower in frequency is all you did. And then you had the experience of the difference, but your consciousness still understood both of them. But when you're asking like a bigger question that isn't stored in a program, and you could probably go into your programming and imagine what that would be like, and that would still, that's why this is so powerful. That would still, even if you use your imagination to see what that would be like, it would still be in the same frequency of your consciousness because it will understand it, right? It'll have an understanding. It'll be using imagination. And that's what a lot of times they'll say, okay, now go feel it, right? And then we're trying to feel it and like all of that. But we're like trying. Anytime we use the word trying, we know that we're in the third level of consciousness and down, and we can laugh at ourselves because it's actually really cute. But when we move into this higher state and we move into the fourth level of consciousness, and that frequency is released, there's going to be an attuning process. And it may even be that we'll get a little hit and it will continue to attune even what that little hit was. So it may be like, oh, I'm supposed to call this old client of mine. And we know that that's only one piece of the whole. So we want to stay open and curious and allow the frequency to continue to attune our consciousness because we have to remember that source frequency is the purest form of intelligence there is. There, it's not conscious, it's intelligent. There is a difference. Consciousness is the observation of that intelligence. So consciousness is wherever we're putting our awareness, we become conscious of whatever frequency we move into. And then that's what we call consciousness. So that's why we always want to go into our original state, which is that we are source intelligence. And when we go and we attune to that frequency and we're taught to keep going in, keep going in, keep going in, and then we start to collaborate with the purest intelligence that there is. And then we start to recognize what that feels like. And it doesn't feel like trying, it feels like openness, stillness, and that we know that in the stillness, eventually our consciousness is going to hit the highest frequency of the answer versus if we're going out and trying to figure it out, we're just going to run into whatever frequency the consciousness can hold. But we want to attune it so that we can attune it long enough to hit the highest part. And then we go 1 to 10 instead of having to go step 1, step 2, step 3. And we may still have some steps along the way, but it's going to be in the highest timeline. I hope that, did that make sense?
That does make sense. So would you say like the process of attunement is to consistently go within, and is it based on specific questions that you have that allows consciousness to like tune in? Well, I don't know if it's called a desired result, but like to tune into a desired result or what you want.
Yeah, so the way that I see desire is it's your body's way of triggering something that you're seeing in duality. Because if it was already within your resonance, it wouldn't be outside of yourself. And so you know that it's not within the quantum field of your innate being, because in your innate being, it would already be there, or is all you would have to do is hit consciousness and then it would show up. But because everything that we do, we're so programmed to identify in our reality, everything creates timelines and it takes a really like long, right? It takes longer to have that experience, but that's not actually the experience that we're supposed to be having. And it's just because of the way that we're using our consciousness that everything becomes dense and slow, but everything's already frequency. So when we use consciousness in this other way, it starts to speed up a little bit. But the first thing to know that when we have a desire come in, it's just prompting a question so that we can bring something that's in duality into oneness. And so once we prompt the question, we have to let it go because the answer of bringing that into the field and for you to experience it consciously is activated in your body. So your only job is to start listening to what the frequency is saying, right? So we call it the listen and do. And if it's, oh, go do this or oh, go do that. It's like you said, sometimes you'll get little hits and then you have to attune a little bit longer because you don't have all the answers. So it's just really learning that dance of co-creation. But that's why I also teach that each level of consciousness is actually connected to a level of our body and the level of our light body. And so if we feel dense, or if we feel like we're trying, like if we feel like we're imagining, the body knows what that feels like, right? But if we're in expansion and we're in stillness, we know what that feels like. So if our body is in expansion and we're receiving information, we know it's going to be clean. But if our body is feeling dense and more contracted, then we know we're in imagination. And most likely it's going to lead us into a little bit more interference because we're on a timeline that's not as high as we could be. And so that's when to pull back. And we're like, okay, I'm just going to wait till my body fully activates my consciousness so that I can bypass having to take these in and out curves and just go straight to the higher frequency. And sometimes it feels like we're not doing anything. Like, but we always are. And even if it's just being still, there's a lot of activity there.
This is really interesting. So I feel like this is why like meditation or presence is always like has been one of the biggest teachers recently. It's like it's not all these complicated things that I feel like I was being taught in the past of you have to do it this way, you have to do this. Every time you experience resistance, you have to kind of dig up the trauma and figure out what's going on. Instead, like what I've been guiding more and more to this year has been like everything happens in the present. Like everything in the past that's being triggered still happens in the present. Everything you want to manifest in the future still happens in the present moment. So instead, like learning how to be present and then respond in the present instead of trying to dig up the past or figure out what's going to anxiously happen in the future. Would you say that's more resonance with tuning into consciousness and calibrating with consciousness?
Yes, I'm going to say absolutely. I feel like that other way is definitely be going to very quickly become old paradigm, is what I would call it, because we don't want to revisit uh, past timelines. It doesn't mean that we pretend like it's not there, but as soon as it's triggered, that's when we know it's time to ascend it, right? It's not to go descend and go back. It's, oh, I just need to ascend into a frequency where I'm creating the, if you want to say, the now moment and into the future moment. And it actually reprograms the nervous system. So when we're triggered and we're allowing that trigger to just go fully through the response if we need it to, and then we allow our attention to go into in what I call the source field. So in that moment, it could be, okay, I prefer to experience this in joy. What does that look like? Like what is could this experience be if it was in a divine frequency? Well, what ends up happening is that frequency releases in the body and it starts informing your consciousness. And then we stay open and curious to what changed. And then all of a sudden, let's say it's a relationship that got triggered. Like all of a sudden, you start seeing them in a different way and you stop reacting to a loop that you guys have that maybe is repeated all over, and then you start talking a little bit different, and maybe you're holding them in a different way. The defenses start to fall down and everything starts to change, and then wherever that trauma came from doesn't matter anymore because now you're experiencing a higher timeline that they just don't match. it doesn't, your body doesn't register it anymore.
So would you say, like I'm thinking in the essence of joy, it's like you can ask your consciousness, what is joy? And then allowing the consciousness to respond to that. And sometimes maybe you'll get a resonance in a visualization, or like you just get that thought, like, oh, you know what would be joyful? Like if I went for a walk today, like would you
Mhm.
say that's how it works?
Yeah, I would even take it a step further and just have a little more, like even challenging it a little more because I feel like some of us have an idea of what joy is, right? So I always like to ask question of something I don't know. So what I would ask is, what is joy in this frequency of source? Like, what is it if I was to hold that? Because you have to remember that frequency is your body. That is your innate frequency. It is 963 hertz. You can actually measure it, is the frequency. If your body is fully in the quantum field as the field, it can be measured at 963 hertz. Your physical body, the program body, is measured at 7.8 hertz. That's a huge difference, right? But that's just the physical aspect of our body. And then, of course, if you started to measure the chemicals, and so we know that we know shame is 20 hertz. We can start to measure those. So that's already going from something that's dense to more energetics. And so you can see like even that has a different frequency. But you have to remember that that frequency is also our body. It's not just an emotion or something that we're feeling, it's our body. So when we can start to ask for these and ask for it to be released from the DNA, it's every time we're asking, we're activating our DNA. So we're literally ascending our body as our consciousness is ascending and not just trying to do it the other way around.
This is really interesting to me. I'm just sitting with that information. Was there anything I like before the interview, you were sharing that you went through this process yourself. It's a personal experience that you personally walked through in order to share this information. Was there anything you were working on within that time frame that allowed you to really anchor in what it meant and things that showed up in your reality to kind of support this new method that's coming through for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can remember like so it was given to me in little pieces of the technology, right? So there's a lot of different pieces and a lot of it is learning what is the states of consciousness we're in. That was the first thing that I learned and then recognizing what my body. So that was like an activation process. And I could say the one that came after that that was kind of really intense was what we call the seven elements. And it's actually seven states of consciousness. And when I started working with those, I started to have mass awarenesses come in. And so is when I kind of started to break off my consciousness from my programmed body and I could start observing it. And so that took me into a really high level to where then I could actually go inside and recognize I'm not just reprogramming my mind. I'm not just reprogramming like what I think. I'm actually reprogramming on a cellular level. And so when that started to happen, I started actually reprogramming my cells. And I would show my cells that I could shift from maybe I'm unworthy or I get triggered here to, oh, I'm actually this. And then my body would respond. And then all of a sudden, my consciousness would just match it. And I would have the experience and I'd be like, oh my gosh, but I didn't even do anything though. As all I did is reprogram my cells. And so that was the next place. But I'll say the place where the step that I actually really had a, oh my gosh, something is definitely different moment was what when I was in it's like step three of the 6 step process, and we call it own codes. And it's when I started coding my DNA. And I actually coded. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just told, do this. And I started doing it. And I was working with my DNA. And I did it for 1 year without having any idea what I was doing. I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know what it's doing. I'm just going to keep doing it. And one day I started noticing that something was different, but I couldn't really figure it out. And then I had something that was like a huge life change. I mean, massive. And I felt nothing. I was like, oh my gosh, why am I not feeling sad? I should feel like something, but I felt nothing. And it wasn't that I didn't feel, I shouldn't say if it didn't feel anything. I didn't feel an emotion. What I did feel was pure frequency. And as much as I would try to go in and have a human experience of this, like, oh my gosh, it just wasn't there. Like, I tried so hard. I'm like, I want to feel sad. I want to feel sad. I'm like, what about this? What about this? And it was like, as much as I tried to go into the programmed experience of what that would look like, I couldn't do it. It was just pure frequency. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get there. And then I was like, okay, why am I trying to go back there? Like this is so much better. And so I pretty much like, then that's when your body enters the field where it starts to recognize itself as frequency instead of a chemical makeup. And that's when we move out of primal into frequency. So that's part of the ascension of the body.
I mean, after that experience of not feeling the program feeling, um, do you feel like this is a state of being that we're all moving towards too, and that having the program experience of duality is becoming like more narrow or like less common? So we don't necessarily have to feel the density like we used to.
It's the next step, right? We're going to move from identifying as these emotion, right? Like we think love is the chemical of oxytocin, for example. And the more that we start to activate the DNA, the more love it becomes a frequency. And I like to show the difference of what it is to be in a programmed experience of the body and what it is to be start to move into the ascended body. And is it's the difference between like a Hertz wave and a scalar wave. So when we start to move into the quantum experience, and the difference of those two waves is a scalar wave is forever and it's consistent. So if a scalar wave is measured at 963, it doesn't matter where it is, it's always going to be 963. So it doesn't diminish over time and space and it doesn't change. But a Hertz wave, you can say, okay, if I'm going to strum the frequency of 528, let's say Hertz. So you strum it and you might kind of feel it, but then it dissipates and it goes away and then you don't feel it again. Well, that's how our body is in the two-strand DNA. So when we want to feel love, we have to trigger that chemical of love. It runs through our system and then it goes away and then we go searching for something to trigger that again, and so we're always searching outside of ourselves to try to trigger that emotion so that we feel love. Well, when we move into the ascended body, we just ask for the frequency to be released. We move into that field and we have the experience consciously, but it doesn't diminish over time and space. It's there for us to move into and have the experience of just by activating the frequency, because that's the way we're supposed to live. That was always the innate way that we were supposed to live. But because we got wrapped up in the two-strand DNA system, we're just having to relearn what it is to be a frequency being.
Makes sense. So that's why most manifestation methods that say like sit and feel what it feels like to already have this experience, that's kind of manifesting and attaching to something outside of yourself versus the cellular ascension, which is the going within again and connecting with the DNA to have that activate the frequency of the scalar.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a little space in what you just said, that I feel like there is, when we look at feeling as an emotion, then absolutely that's not where we want to go,
Mm.
because then we're creating a timeline that's based in like basically an addiction to trying to create something through a program, and that's not what we, the purest way is to go to the frequency. But so what I would do, and I would say is okay, I want to manifest this. So we know all we did is we recognized the where, like what I call step one is recognized. You woke up. Oh, I want to have this in my life because I don't. That's just an awakening process, right? It's not that it's bad or good. It's just I noticed that this isn't in my field, and now I woke up to that. And then we move into the second level of consciousness, which is a choice. And the choice is, how am I going to manifest this? Am I going to move into the third level of consciousness and try? And that's when I'm going to use my imagination. I'm going to feel it and do all those different things like vision board. Or the choice could be I'm going to go from skip over step three and I'm going to move right into step four. And that's when we can be like, okay, I recognize that this came to my attention, that I would like to bring this into my life. I'm going to ask my DNA to release the frequency. And then the choice is to move into that frequency and attune and listen and do. And that can feel like inactive at times and it's uncomfortable because sometimes there's an attuning process there and then sometimes it's going to be things that we don't think it's going to be and that's uncomfortable too. So there's a little bit of trust and practice in being able to hold our consciousness there because the other way is much more active. And so it's going to entertain the ego a lot more. And we feel like we have a little bit more control over that because we're doing it versus we're having something come in and is guiding us where we have a lot less control. And the control is always going to be, am I going to say yes to the guidance or am I going to say no?
Ah. Have you experienced personally or seen others experience where things start to fall apart when they begin to do this process? And then how do you move through that, right? Because I feel like the ego will get quite attached to the old stuff and like what you thought you were supposed to be or do and the old identity. So how do you move through that process?
Yeah, I feel like it's just one of those things where it kind of depends on how much of your life you chose through your programming and how much you didn't. But there's never anything that was chosen wrong. And as long as you continue to choose consciously, everything changes. So just because the guidance could be, you're supposed to quit your job, right? That doesn't mean you have to go quit your job. It just means like, okay, I received that guidance. What I would do is, okay, what's my first step? So what is my first step? Well, it might be like, we'll start exploring other things that you love, right? Maybe in the beginning you just go take an art class or you go do this or you go do that, but you're co-creating in that frequency. But the first thing that you had to become conscious that was going to be that's going to be a choice that you make at some point. And the other one may be like, oh, you're supposed to leave your husband. It's like, don't go get a divorce. It's like, okay, well, now I'm going to become conscious of what are the things I enjoy about this relationships and what is it that I don't. And then I'm going to be very, very clear about what I'm choosing. I'm choosing the things I don't like and what am I getting out of it? So that it like starts to change the way that instead of putting all our power into, oh, this choice has to be made, it's like it allows consciousness to start to have the frequency of our DNA start to attune that answer into our because your DNA is it's a transmitter, right? So when we're asking for these things, it's not just hitting our consciousness, it's hitting our reality as well. And so it may be that you had to have that awareness so that you could shift the perspective and see something very, very clearly. And then what may happen, it doesn't mean this, we don't ever hold the first answer as the ultimate answer because it could be that you shift a timeline up here and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now that you were threatened with that, look what it really is. And it made you appreciate what you have so much more. And you're like, oh my God, but if I would have never had that experience, I would have never gotten here. So as long as we keep our mind out of the way and we let the frequency keep transmitting and showing us what's possible within our reality, it just becomes magical no matter what it is.
I heard somewhere that it was like the experience of the soul is not just to have like money or things. It's because the soul is here to have the experience itself. So part of the experience or part of the way of living that I've kind of stepped into, it was just asking Source to show me what's next. instead of having all these attachments because I'm like, I'm so tired of things not working out. And I've been on this journey for a while where it's like a pivot after pivot after pivot. And I'm just like, whoa, okay, we're going here. But it's always the best experience that I could have never even thought of myself. So, in this way, would you say that like we're inherently guided, even if we're not conscious that we're doing this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and this we could totally go down a rabbit hole with this one. But yeah, I actually have this. I've sit in this a lot actually, and one of those is do we even have free will, right? Is like is that even a thing, or is it an observation of the ego? And what I got to is that we don't, right? Is that it's our perception of where we're holding consciousness on a specific timeline, which will give us the illusion of whatever it is that we think it is. But the frequency is the frequency. And that's actually kind of nice to know that everything's already the frequency of source. So to think that we have free will within a frequency of source because we are the frequency of source. So in that frequency, it doesn't have consciousness, it has intelligence. And I think it's important to know to like recognize what the difference is there. And so when we know that this intelligence is us, it's in all things, and then when we hit a timeline and then we have the observation of a frequency, depending on where the frequency of our consciousness is, will give us the experience of either free will or not. And I'm just going to tell you how I came to this because I think I like think about something in your life where you had this pivotal moment where you had to make a decision. You're like, oh, I have this decision that I need to make. And then the time that went from knowing you had to make the decision and you actually made the decision. And so, what do we do during all this time? Is we go research, we go talk to our friends, mull it over, we do all these things, and then we hit the timeline where the decision's supposed to be made, and we make it, and we think, oh, yeah, this was my decision. So I tried this. I actually did it a couple of different times. So I did it both ways. And then second time, I did nothing. I just waited until it hit a timeline where I was supposed to make the decision and I just made it. And what I recognized, it would have been the same either way. And so whether or not I went through all of that, or if I just waited to hit the timeline, either way, the decision was going to be the same. And I'm like, is it free will, or I just hit the timeline and that's what happened, right? So it kind of is fun to think about.
I actually, oh, that's such a good example because I can resonate with that. When it came to a big decision, I'm over here like, let me ask my friend who's intuitive. I mean, like you're intuitive too, but it's like, oh, you're like you want validation because you feel like it's a big decision.
Exactly. I know. And then you just laugh at yourself. You're like, okay, like what was that all about? Because I mean, and then it makes you think like, okay, like you think you're making the decision. I think I'm making the decision, but are we?
I mean, how do you feel about those points where you feel like, oh, wow, like I was really guided by where my consciousness was at that point? And I feel like I used to have this feeling of, oh my God, I didn't do enough to get out of this state of consciousness, that I should have been, practicing harder or meditating more or X, Y, and Z. Like, what is your perception of that?
I feel like when it's time to move a higher state of consciousness is when it's time. We're gonna have the experience of where we are because like we don't know like what's outside of that. Like it could have been that we were waiting for another timeline to hook up to where we were ready to do it because so we can move right into another frequency pattern too, right? So I feel like it's always perfect no matter what it is. And it's when we get hard, like down on ourselves or hard on ourselves. I feel like that's also the kind of that old paradigm of, oh, I'm doing it wrong, or, oh, I'm going to repeat that karma. And really, it's just, I think the thing that we all should just be practicing is not judging whether or not we did it right or wrong. It should be like, where am I going to go? Right? Like when I go into judgment, instead of creating a timeline around it, I'm just going to go back in, activate the frequency of source. I'm going to tune my consciousness there and like, what is it really? And what happens is that it's fascinating what we're shown, right? We're like, I would have never saw it that way. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And life just starts to like bloom and open up because it shows you things that the program mind can't access.
I was having this one experience because this year I was like, why am I guided back to inner child? I was like, I felt like I worked through this like 2 years ago, right? Like, why am I guided back to inner child stuff? And it made me realize that like the frequency that I was in previously, even though I thought I was, like so high consciousness, I was still operating the behavioral patterns of like a lower consciousness belief system. And when I was being shown this image of like, well, why am I going through this experience? It was bringing me back to almost like that feeling of like the purity of when you were a child and how close that was to the frequency of source, and how when you're a child, you are literally just in alignment with source. It's whatever's being expressed through you. So I was being shown that was the golden timeline. And then the current version, or like the version of me that I thought was so far ahead, um, was like this empty shell. And it was like, if you keep going down this path of what you thought you had progressed so far in, it would echo this empty shell, or this lower frequency into the future. So what I thought was regressing backwards was actually connecting to a more pure source frequency. So I was like,
You know what else I heard when you were talking is that so many times when we're given these things, like go do some inner child work, is if it's not approached in the way that you just so beautifully, I can really feel the frequency in your experience. And it's almost like we go and try to do it with our mind and expect it to change something, but it's not actually changing. We have to actually move into the experience. And what you did is you tapped into the pure frequency, right? That was a frequency that was activated. Your body brought you into that experience, and it was pure because it wasn't done by trying to make it happen. It like almost informed you, and then you had the experience. That's amazing.
thank you. And it did bring me back to the present moment because I every time I felt disconnected, my guidance was go back to the inner child and like live through the inner child. Like, what is the inner child just expressing in this very moment? And it made me remember that like this is how we live. We respond in the present moment. And when I was a child, I would always be creating, but it wasn't creation from fear, and it wasn't creation from performance. It was creation from joy. Like it
Mm.
was just creation for this pure essence of creation. And that was an experience that I had forgotten. Like I had let go of that pure essence of joy.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, well, thank you for allowing me to share. Um, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience? I know you shared a practice with us. Do you feel guided to share anything else with us in activation or?
Yeah, we could do an activation. Let me grab I'll pull a couple of the DMT cards. So DMT stands for Divine Molecular Technology. So these codes are part of the technology that that came through the guidance of our 6 steps of cell ascension. And so each code is connected to a strand of DNA, and each code is actively kind of disconnecting from a programmed experience of the body and putting it into a frequency of pure source. So an example is each of the codes is connected to one of the universal laws, because what we won't be in universal laws and when we start to activate this, because if you think about, if we're all source and we're holding consciousness as the intelligence, universal laws aren't needed. Why would we have a law against ourselves, right? It doesn't make sense. So it's kind of crazy to think about where we're going as a civilization or like as a species, but the message is that we have the most advanced. I mean, we literally have the intelligence, the technology of source, and it's time to activate that and experience what that is. All right, so I'm just going to pull 3 codes, so I'll read them and then we'll do the activation. So the first code is the 4. So this is the alchemist. So it's the ability to take something and turn it into something else. So it's also new form. So it's the ascension. It's the first part of the ascension of the body because it's taking what we experience of the body and bringing it into a higher timeline where it can be multidimensional. Another way of seeing this is going from chemical to frequency. This also could be if you're manifesting something right now, it could be taking the timeline of your experience and putting it into a higher one. So you think alchemist. And then the 22. So that I feel like this is definitely a manifestation code, I can tell you already. So everybody be thinking about what they want to bring into manifestation while I'm reading them. So the second one is master creator. This is the 22. So it's the ability to be the creation of source. What I love about the 22 is that it's activating the frequency to be both the creation itself and the creator of that creation. So if you think about if you're the creator and the creation, you're either one or you're in your consciousness has experienced the creation of itself, or it's experiencing the creation of the creation, like the creator of it. So there's no room to step out and be look at what's being created. So it keeps you in the flow of either your creation or you're the creator, but you never actually leave the timeline, and it keeps it in that pure space of frequency of source. Such a beautiful code. And then the last one is 8, which is the manifestor abundance. So that is the code. So the 4 is going to be whatever it is that you desire. We're going to put it into a higher timeline. We're going to activate it with pure source creation and then bring it into flow and abundance. All right, so let's do the activation. If you want to just place your hands on your heart. And the first thing we'll do is we'll tap into that quantum portal of your heart. And you can just gently place your intention there, and you're going to let it go. So you're just going to ask for your intention, knowing that once you ask, the frequency of your body is already starting to turn on. It's bringing it into the frequency of source. And now we're going to activate the DNA. So we're going to activate DMT code number 4. So you're just going to feel the code. And if you want to, you can just feel it moving right into your third eye, right into the pineal gland, allowing it to spin. And as it spins, it's activating every cell of your body. And then I'm just going to do a little light language to activate the code. This is releasing any density, any old timelines, limiting belief systems. Just feeling that as it fully activates, dissolving any limitations or density. And then we'll activate DMT code number 22, Master Creator, the creation of the divine frequency. Just feeling that code as it activates in every cell of your body, allowing your intention to move into the divine creation. Just feeling that code as it activates, putting your body into this higher timeline. It's attuning your consciousness. And then we'll activate the 8, divine manifester, divine flow, divine abundance. Just feeling that code as it activates in every cell of your body, allowing all those codes to work together as it creates a divine grid system, locking your body, your mind, and your reality into the quantum experience of your body, just feeling all of your cells at this higher spin state. And now just taking a moment to allow your consciousness to have the experience of the frequency, just staying in the stillness. And then just for the sake that we're on a podcast, as much as we all want to just sit and be quiet for people that are just listening, we'll come back. So just whenever you're ready, you can just go ahead and open your eyes.
Thank you so much, Jules. I started seeing in the third one cells kind of splitting off the wall. It was really interesting. I'm not
Super
quite
fun.
sure what it meant, but I felt something moving.
I always say just stay in the experience, right? It's just sometimes our mind wants to come in and be like, oh my God, this is happening. Oh my gosh, this is happening. And if we are just like, it's more like, oh, that's interesting. Right? Just staying in the experience.
I love that so much because what you shared was also about just being present and allowing it to unfold. I was just like, okay, something is happening, just allow it to unfold.
And now is the fun part, right? Because that's the activation. And now it's allowing ourselves to stay open and curious and let the frequency begin to inform our minds and our reality and see it reshape into this higher frequency. And that's the fun part, right? And every once in a while, we might see something that feels like resistance, but we have to remember it's exactly what we asked for. So we can see it as information, and that just went from that like first level of consciousness to the second is that we woke up. Okay, there's something here. I see it. Now what's my choice? And always asking the DNA for guidance.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that information as well. And as we are coming to a close in this beautiful conversation, would you like to share your free gift with us and the audience members?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't remember what it was.
Here, and it was the I think it was the bundle token. Hold on us 1 second.
Sorry.
Not at all. It happens. It was a manifest free link, becoming
Yeah, it was the manifest course. So this is a really fun one. So it's kind of going through all of the technology and learning how to hold consciousness and frequency. It's a little guidance of kind of going through it and learning to ask for that frequency to release and then what to do. So it's kind of a step-by-step guidance that you can follow. And of course, it's called manifest because you come in with an intention and you can bring your intention all the way through until it comes into manifestation.
This is so exciting. Thank you so much, Jules, for sharing that with us. Would you also like to share with us any upcoming events that you have or offers that you have and how they can connect with you, or what's your website so they can connect with you?
Yeah, that's the easiest way is go to becomingbioquantum.com, and then we have our memberships there. We have our events, like so we have lots of live free events that we do, also in-person events. And then our course page as well. So we have we're doing DQ for abundance. So it's reprogramming your cells for abundance, and that will start on August 6th, I believe, is the beginning of that. So those are some fun things that are coming.
Amazing. I will have all of Jules' links below in the video description. And thank you, Jules, for coming on the show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the next episode.